Hello and welcome to Liberty Park Music's Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music Theory exam preparation course. I'm your instructor, Nicole DiPaolo, and if you've browsed through Liberty Park's other theory offerings, you may be familiar with our regular curriculum. In these lessons, we'll cover some of the same things the standard theory courses offer, but they'll be sequenced and presented in such a way that they'll match the ABRSM exam syllabi more closely. If you aren't yet confident in your ability to read music fluently, I'd highly recommend reviewing the introductory theory course, Music Literacy, before embarking on your exams. We'll be exploring some of the most important building blocks of music notation: quavers, crotchets, minims, and semibrevs, as well as their rests. Crotchets, or quarter notes. The first really important thing to keep in mind is that all these note lengths we're going to talk about are relative to each other and the speed of the music. They relate to each other by fractions, like the American terms whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, and so on. This is why it may be helpful for you to commit the American terms to memory as well, because they'll tell you mathematically what the note value will represent. However, there is no one absolute speed each note has to represent in terms of beats per minute or anything. Let the music be your guide. For practical purposes, we will most often count beats using the crotchet or quarter note. The crotchet, then, gets one beat. It looks like this. Minims and half notes. If you've studied fractions before, you might expect that the minim, also called the half note, is going to be twice as long as a quarter note would be. And you're right, it does equal 2 crotchets. It's written with an open note head like this. Here's a little piece that contains crotchets on top and minims on the bottom, so you can see how they line up with each other. And here they are shown together in the same piece, but not necessarily lining up. Semibrevs or whole notes. And of course, the half note must be half of something. That's the whole note. Also called the semibrev, it looks like a big, bold oval without a stem, like this. So the semibrev will have the same duration as 2 minims or 4 crotchets. If the crotchet is 1 beat, the semibrev is 4 beats. Here's a different version of that same melody we showed earlier, combining crotchets, minims, and semibrevs. Now, follow along as we play Mary Had a Little Lamb, which contains crotchets, minims, and semibrevs. You're welcome to sing along, tap, clap, or speak the rhythm on syllables. Quavers or eighth notes. We've already established the pattern of how note values get smaller and smaller by dividing each note value in half. Whole notes cut in half become half notes, and those cut in half become quarter notes. So what is half of a quarter? An eighth. The other name for this note value is a quaver. Here is a single quaver. And see that little flag on the quaver? Those can also be joined together with other quavers, forming beans. That makes them easier for us to count. Sometimes in vocal music you will see unbeamed quavers if each quaver is set to its own syllable in a word, but instrumental music won't usually do this. Rests. Of course, for every note value there must be an equal measure of silence. For this we use symbols called rests. Here is what a quaver rest looks like, since we just talked about quavers. And here is a crotchet rest. The half and whole note, that is, minim and semibrev rests, are a little trickier since they look alike. Here's a fun way to remember them using the American fractional terminology. A half note rest is a little black dash that sits on top of a line. It looks a bit like a hat. So you can think that half sounds like hat. Here's what a half rest looks like, both by itself and on an actual line of music. A whole note rest hangs down below the line, almost like a plate or bowl. So you can think whole sounds more like bowl. Here's what a whole rest looks like by itself and on a musical staff. Bar lines. In some of the previous examples, you may have noticed that the music was divided by thin vertical lines spaced at regular intervals, like after every fourth crotchet beat. Here's one example. See those single vertical lines that break up the groups of 4 crotchets and 2 crotchets plus a minim? These are called bar lines or measure lines. What is a bar or a measure then? Both terms refer to a box within the music that denotes a group of a certain number of beats, in this case 4. And they organize a longer piece of music into coherent groups of that many beats, allowing you to find where you are in the music more easily and really feel the pulse. The number of beats in each measure can change over the course of a piece sometimes, and later in this unit we'll talk about how that's indicated. Sometimes you'll see what look like 2 bar lines together, like at the end of that example you just saw. This is called a double bar. Double bars indicate boundaries between large sections of music. Some pop songs will put a double bar between a verse and the chorus, for example. At the very end of a piece, you will usually see a type of double bar in which the second line is a lot thicker. This is called a final bar line, since it's used to mark the end of the piece. Time signatures. Next, we will learn about time signatures and how they map out the pulse and distribution of strong and weak beats in a piece of music. This mapping of pulse is called meter. During the previous discussion on bar lines, were you wondering how we determine where we place those bar lines? And have you wondered just how we determine which note value is the one we use to count beats? Well, it's the time signature that does both these things. A time signature is written with 2 numbers stacked vertically, or sometimes a letter, like this. The top number indicates how many beats we are going to include in each measure. Remember measures, those little boxes from our last lesson? They will almost always contain the same number of beats throughout the piece unless the composer has indicated a new time signature. The bottom number shows what type of note value we are using to count the beat with. In our previous lessons, we have been using the quarter note as the beat most of the time. And indeed, most of the common time signatures have a 4 on the bottom to show that the quarter note, or the crotchet, is being used to count the beats. But sometimes you can use half notes, or minims, shown with a 2 on the bottom. Eighth notes, or quavers, which would show an 8 on the bottom. Even 16th notes, or semiquavers, or any other non-dotted note value. Examples. Here are some examples of common meters and the type of music they can be found in. Here's an example in 4/4 time. Now, in this example by Beethoven, we see the letter C substituting for 4/4. You can think of the C as standing for common time, since 4/4 is the most common time signature in a lot of the classical music we'll be working with in this course. And then here is a piece in 3/4 time. It's a waltz by Frédéric Chopin. Most of the time, a piece's time signature will influence the way notes are grouped together within it. In 4/4, 3/4, and 2/4, the time signatures we work with in grade 1, we will beam the quavers together into groups of 2. So in these meters, you won't really ever see groups of 3 quavers except in special circumstances. And sometimes in 4/4, you'll also see groups of 4 quavers. Review. Let's do a little pop quiz. What are these notes called? Yes, this is a minim or half note. Either term is fine for the exam. How about this one? Yes, that's a semibreve or a whole note. How about this symbol? Yes, this is a crotchet rest. It's also called a quarter rest. How about this one? Yes, that's a quaver rest or an eighth note rest. Here's an excerpt we looked at earlier. Now, what are the little vertical lines in this excerpt? Yes, they are bar lines, separating each bar of 4 beats. Now, take a look at these excerpts and decide what time signature you think fits each one best. Here's the first one. It might be most helpful just to look at the left hand or the bottom part in this excerpt. Yes, there are 4 crotchets in each bar or box. That means that based on this information we have, we'd probably want to put this piece in 4/4 time. How about this one? Again, it's probably most helpful to look at the bottom line, but either way, we see that the number of crotchets in each line adds up to 3. Since the crotchet, or quarter, shown here as 4th, is what we are using to count, and there are 3 of them in each bar, the time signature that best fits this piece is 3/4, 3 crotchets per bar. Thanks so much for watching, and see you soon for the next lesson in our ABRSM Grade 1 course, where we'll start exploring notes on the staff.